Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
I used to think the American dream was a straight road. Work hard, buy a house, raise a family, and eventually everything falls into place. That's what I was told growing up in Indiana, in a small town called Greenfield, where the cornfield stretched out like an endless golden sea, and neighbors not only knew your middle name, but could recite your entire family tree going back 3 generations. Sunday church at the old Methodist chapel wasn't optional, it was the rhythm of life, complete with potluck dinners where everyone brought their famous casserole or apple pie. My old man, a mechanic at the local garage for 40 years, would always say, "Mark, a man's worth is measured by the weight he can carry." And I carried a lot, maybe too much. From the time I was a kid, I watched him come home with grease under his nails and a quiet satisfaction in his eyes, fixing cars for folks who couldn't afford new ones. He taught me that real men don't complain, they endure. And endure I did, through scraped knees on the playground, high school football injuries, and later, the relentless grind of adult life. At 39, my day started at 5 a.m., with the alarm blaring like a warning siren from some old war movie. I'd slap it off, roll out of bed, and shuffle to the bathroom, where the mirror showed a face etched with lines from too many squints against the sun and too few real smiles. By 6, I was already behind the wheel of my rusty F-150, coffee in one hand from the gas station down the block, black, no sugar, because who had time for frills, and my heart tossed in the passenger seat like an old friend. The drive to the construction site took 40 minutes through the flat Indiana landscape, past silos and billboards advertising farm equipment or the latest church revival. 12-hour shifts weren't unusual, they were the rule. I worked for Midwest Builders, a commercial construction company that poured concrete for big box stores like Walmart, highways that snaked through the Midwest, and the occasional school or community center. It was grueling, bone-deep work, hauling rebar under the blazing summer sun that turned your shirt into a sopping rag, or shivering in winter winds that cut through your jacket like knives. My hands were calloused maps of cuts and scars, each one a story of a nail bent wrong or a beam slipped, but it paid enough to keep the mortgage from crushing me entirely. Or at least, that's what I told myself every payday when I deposited the check and watched the numbers barely budge. We had bought the house 5 years back, a 2-story colonial in the suburbs of Indianapolis, with beige siding that peeled a bit in the corners from the harsh winters, and a fenced yard that was supposed to be perfect for the kids. There was a swing set out back that I'd assembled myself one weekend, cursing under my breath as the instructions flew away in the wind. The mortgage was steep, $1,800 a month, but my wife, Liza, insisted it was an investment in our future. Shed tour open houses on weekends, her eyes lighting up at granite countertops and walk-in closets, saying, "Mark, imagine the barbecues we'll have here." At the time, I agreed, signing the papers with a mix of excitement and terror. I wanted to give her everything she dreamed of, a safe home with good schools nearby, vacations to Florida, where we'd rent a condo on the beach, and watch the kids build sandcastles, maybe a kitchen remodel down the line with those fancy appliances she clipped from magazines. Instead, I ended up working myself into the ground just to keep the lights on, the water running, and the hoe fees paid, so our yard didn't turn into a neighborhood eyesore. Debt followed me like a shadow, long and persistent, stretching out behind every decision. Between the mortgage, credit card bills that piled up from unexpected car repairs or holiday gifts, and the medical expenses from when our youngest, little Emma, had that asthma scare 2 years ago, emergency room visits, inhalers, specialist appointments. I was juggling numbers every month, praying nothing bounced. I'd sit at the kitchen table after dinner, calculator in hand, moving money from one account to another like a desperate magician. My parents helped more than I ever admitted to anyone, even Liza. They weren't rich, just steady, practical folks who still lived in the same small brick house I grew up in, with its creaky wooden floors and the old oak tree in the front yard, where I used to swing as a kid. But when things got tight, they'd hand me an envelope with a few hundred in cash no questions asked, slipped into my hand during Sunday dinners. Dad would clap my shoulder, his grip still strong despite arthritis, and say, "You're a golden husband, son. Don't forget that." Mom would nod, her eyes soft, adding, "We're proud of you, Mark. You're building something real." Those words kept me going, even when I felt like I was drowning in a sea of red ink and overdue notices. Liza, she was different from the start. She had this restless energy, like being still was suffocating her, a firecracker in a world of steady candles. At 34, she still had the same sharp green eyes that could pierce right through you and dyed blonde hair that caught attention when we walked into restaurants or the grocery store. People always said she looked younger than her age, maybe 28 on a good day, and she thrived on it, spending hours at the salon getting highlights or manicures. To the world, she was the lucky one married to a man who worked his tail off, provided vacations every summer to places like Orlando, where we'd watch the kids' faces light up at the fireworks, and even helped her mom when she fell behind after her divorce. I remember wiring money last Christmas, just so Liza wouldn't worry during the holidays. But behind closed doors, I could feel her drifting, like a boat slipping its moorings in a slow current. She'd say things like, "Mark, you're always at work. The kids barely know you. I feel like I'm raising them alone." Her voice carried that edge, sharp enough to cut, but soft enough to make you question if you were overreacting. And it'd bite back my frustration, my jaw clenching as I pictured the sweat-soaked days on the site, thinking, "I'm pushing as hard as I can, so we can stand on solid ground. Doesn't that count for anything?" But I didn't say it. I just nodded, promised to try to be home earlier, maybe take a half day soon. And the cycle repeated. I'd come home exhausted, collapse on the couch, and shed sigh before retreating to her phone or the bedroom. What I didn't know then was how deep her dissatisfaction ran. She started spending more time with her girlfriends, which I chalked up to needing an escape from the kids. Our son Jake, 10, with his endless energy for sports, and Emma, 8, who loved drawing and asking a million questions. Liza would head out in the evenings, dressed up nicer than usual, perfume lingering in the air like a secret. I'd watch the kids, help with homework, make sure baths were taken and teeth brushed. "Girls' night out," she'd say with a wave, and I'd smile, telling myself it was good for her to have friends. She had a way of making me feel guilty for even questioning her, turning my concerns into accusations of not trusting her, and I overworked and desperate to keep the peace let it slide, burying my unease under layers of denial. One evening, after another 12-hour shift where we'd battled a sudden rainstorm that turned the site into a muddy swamp, I came home dead on my feet. My boots left tracks on the entryway rug, and my back ached from lifting wet pallets. The house was quiet, kids tucked into bed by her mother, who had practically moved in at that point, sleeping on the pull-out couch more nights than not. Liza was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, barely looking up when I walked in, the blue glow illuminating her face in the dim living room. "Dinner's in the microwave," she muttered, not even pausing her thumb swipe. I wanted to ask how her day was, how the kids behaved, if there was anything new, but I could tell by her tone, or wouldn't get much more than a shrug. So I reheated the leftovers cold lasagna from tonight's ago, ate alone at the kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light, and told myself this was just a phase. Every marriage had rough patches, right? We'd been together 12 years, we'd weathered job losses, miscarriages, family feuds. This was just another storm. The first crack in that illusion came in the form of a small piece of paper, a crumpled receipt from a pawn shop, tucked inside the pocket of Lisa's coat, hanging in the hall closet. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was looking for a pen before heading to work the next morning, rummaging through pockets out of habit. And there it was, yellowed paper, folded twice. Lombard's Pawn and Jewelry, $450 loan against diamond bracelet. Item description, 14,000 gold with sapphire accents. My heart sank like a stone in the Ohio River. That bracelet wasn't just jewelry, it was my mother's. A family heirloom she'd given Liza as a wedding gift, passed down through our family. It was more than metal and stones, it was history, love, continuity. I felt my chest tighten, disappointment mixing with disbelief, my fingers trembling. I smoothed out the receipt. Why would she pawn something so sentimental? And more importantly, why hadn't she told me? We weren't without options. I made sure the bills were paid, even if it meant skipping lunches or fixing the truck myself instead of taking it to the shop. I confronted her that night, holding up the slip like evidence in a trial, my voice steady, but my insides churning. "Liza, what is this? You pawned Mom's bracelet." Her eyes flickered, guilt flashing like lightning, then irritation. She set her glass down on the coffee table with a clink. "I needed some quick cash, okay? You're always watching the money, Mark. I didn't want to ask. Quick cash for what? We pay the bills. We could have discussed it. What could you possibly need $450 for that you couldn't talk to me about?" She crossed her arms, defiant, her chin lifting in that way she did when cornered. "It's none of your business. You're acting like I stole it or something." That was the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. The air in the room felt thicker, charged with unspoken truths. I couldn't let it go. That pawn ticket burned a hole in my pocket 4 days, taunting me every time I reached for my keys or wallet. On the job site, while the guys were joking about the Colts' latest loss or cussing at the heat that made sweat drip into our eyes, my mind was elsewhere. I was picturing that bracelet sitting in some glass case under fluorescent lights, strangers looking at it, while my mother's face, so proud when she gave it to Liza at our wedding reception, haunted me like a ghost. The next Saturday, I skipped my usual fishing trip with Dad and drove to Lombard's Pawn and Jewelry on the east side of town. The place was a dingy storefront sandwiched between a liquor store and a tattoo parlor, the sign flickering like it was on its last leg. It smelled like dust and old metal inside, guitars with broken strings, old TVS, jewelry tangled in piles. I asked about the bracelet, describing it from memory, and sure enough, it was there, tagged and locked in a display case. The clerk, a balding guy with nicotine-stained fingers and an Amatag reading girl, didn't even blink when I explained it was my wife who'd pawned it. He just shrugged, chewing on a toothpick, and said, "She's been in here more than once." That line hit me like a wrecking ball. More than once. What else had she sold? My mind raced as I paid to redeem the bracelet, handing over the money with interest, feeling like a fool the whole time. On the drive home, my hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The bracelet safe in my glove compartment. If she'd pawned one thing, what else was she hiding? Was it impulsive spending? Something else? That night, after the kids went to bed, Jake reading his comic books under the covers, Emma clutching her stuffed bear, I opened her laptop. It was sitting on the dining room table, charging. I knew her password, same one since college, and my stomach twisted as I typed it in, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I wasn't proud of myself, but I was desperate for answers, the kind that wouldn't come from defensiveness. Emails flooded the screen, credit card statements in the inbox, reminders and overdue notices stacked like bricks in a wall I never saw being built. She was thousands in debt, store cards, short-term loans with painful interest, cash advances. Some were in her name alone, some in both of ours. I felt my blood pressure spike as I scrolled through the transactions. Spa visits, high-end shopping, online orders, takeout stacked on top of takeout. And then came the messages. Buried in our social media chat threads, there he was, a man named Chris. His profile picture was blurry. A guy in his late 30s with tattoos on his neck and a grin that screamed trouble. Their conversations weren't subtle late night, "I miss you" texts, hearts and winks, promises of easy money and a better life without all the stress. My chest tightened when I read the part where he told her he had something to help you unwind, and she replied with encouragement. There were personal photos and plenty of plans to meet up. It all made sense then. The cash withdrawals from our joint account, the pawn slips, her constant complaints that I was boring and never around. She wasn't just unhappy, she was chasing a mirage with someone who fed the idea that shortcuts could fix everything. The timestamp showed meetings during my shifts, in out-of-the-way places or at his apartment. I sat there in the glow of the laptop screen, shaking with a slow, deep anger, betrayal, and humiliation tangled like rebar. I wanted to storm into the living room, throw the computer on the floor, and demand answers, shout until the neighbors heard. But the kids were asleep upstairs, their breaths rising and falling, and the last thing I wanted was for them to wake up to chaos. Instead, I closed the laptop, walked into the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face until my skin stung. Staring into the mirror, I barely recognized the man looking back, bags under his eyes from sleepless nights, jaw clenched like a vice, shoulders slumped from years of carrying a load no one appreciated. I felt old, used up, like the American dream had been a bait-and switch. When I finally confronted Liza, it wasn't explosive. It was cold, controlled like a foreman laying out the facts at a safety meeting. I know about the pawn shop. I know about the debts. And I know about Chris. Her face went pale. For a second, I thought she might break down, confess, ask for help. Instead, she snapped back with a hardened tone. You went through my stuff. That's invasive, Mark. Maybe if you weren't gone 12 hours a day, I wouldn't need someone who actually listens to me, who makes me feel alive instead of trapped. That cut deeper than she knew. I tried to reason with her, tried to remind her of the kids, of the years we'd built together since meeting at that county fair back in our 20s, of the sacrifices I made to keep us afloat. But she wasn't hearing it. To her, I was the jailer, the one who clipped her wings with my endless work ethic, and Chris the one promising shortcuts and excitement was freedom. The final straw came a week later, when her parents invited me over to talk. I thought maybe they'd help knock some sense into her. Instead, they sat me down at their kitchen table, Liza at their side, arms crossed. Mark, her father started. She's miserable. She tells us you don't make time for her. You work and work. But what about love? What about passion? Her mother chimed in. She's not happy. And a woman has the right to be happy. Maybe this is your fault. I sat there in disbelief, listening to people who had no idea what it meant to sacrifice in the way we had to. They didn't see the blisters on my hands, the hours I lost with my kids, the debt I shouldered to pay for stability. All they saw were tears and a story of being trapped. I didn't argue. I just stood up, nodded once, and walked out. That night, I knew it was over. The marriage that started with vows under a white tent in my parents' backyard, surrounded by fireflies and laughter, had crumbled. When I finally told Liza I wanted a divorce, it was less of a fight and more of a surrender. I'd been holding the line 4 months, trying to keep the dam from bursting, but at some point you realize you're the only one bailing water, while the other person's drilling holes in the boat. We were in the kitchen, late at night, the fridge humming softly in the background, the kids asleep upstairs. I set my coffee mug down on the counter, looked her straight in the eye, and said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. We're getting a divorce. Her reaction, not tears, not shock, just a smirk, almost like she'd been waiting for me to say it, so she could be the victim in her own narrative. Finally, she said, you're setting me free from this prison you call a home. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, lawyers in stuffy offices with stacks of files, and tense exchanges over text about who got what. She fought hard for custody, claiming I was never home and to focus on work to raise kids properly. It was a distortion of reality that made my blood boil. Every dollar I earned, every hour I spent out in the weather, was for them, for her. But in court, her story painted me as absent and cold. If it weren't for my parents, I don't know how I would have survived that period. They showed up for every hearing, sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, and reminded me I wasn't alone. My dad would clasp my shoulder in the hallway afterward and whisper, keep steady, son. Truth has a way of standing up. Mom would pack lunches for me and the kids on my visitation days, slipping in little notes that said, we believe in you. When the judge finally granted me joint custody after months of mediation and evaluations, I felt like he'd just finished the longest marathon of my life. It wasn't everything. I still had to send the kids back to our house half the time, unsure what they might witness, but it was enough. Enough to hold on to them, enough to remind myself I wasn't the failure I feared I was. The house, of course, was gone. She wanted it, and honestly, I didn't have the fight left to keep it. Too many memories clung to its walls, arguments in the kitchen, silent dinners, the spot on the living room floor where he'd found that porn receipt. So I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment not far from the kids' school, in a complex with a pool they loved in the summer. It was small, plain, with beige carpets that showed every stain and walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV. But it was mine. No ghosts of broken promises, no hidden slips in coat pockets, just me and the sound of my kids' laughter echoing off the bare walls every other weekend, turning the place into a home. Financially, it was brutal at first. Support payments were a heavy lift, leaving me scraping by on simple meals and careful budgeting. Some nights he'd sit at the kitchen table, a rickety thing I picked up at a garage sale, staring at my bank statement, wondering how long before I crumbled. But then he'd think of the alternative, living a lie, and watching everything slide further off track. Suddenly the struggle felt lighter, like setting down a weight he'd carried too far. The hardest part wasn't the money, though. It was explaining to the kids why Mom and Dad didn't live together anymore. My daughter, just 8, asked me one night before bed in the new apartment, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" That broke me. I hugged her tight and said, "No, sweetheart, you and Jake did everything right. This is between Mommy and Daddy. We both love you more than anything in the world. Nothing changes that." As the dust settled, more truth came to light. Word got around our town wasn't that big that Liza kept spending time with the same crowd that had pulled her away. Her parents still defended her, telling anyone who'd listen that my obsession with work drove her to it. But I stopped caring about the whispers. I realized something during that storm. The truth doesn't need defending. It stands on its own, solid as a good foundation. And my truth was simple. I was free. Free from constant accusations. Free from the lies that piled up. Free from the crushing weight of trying to hold a marriage together by myself. Of course, freedom doesn't erase pain. It doesn't fill the empty bed at night or silence the doubts that creep in at 2 a.m., whispering that maybe if it worked less and listened more, things would be different. But it's a start, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had room to breathe. The first year after the divorce was the hardest and the most liberating of my life. It was like learning to walk again after years of dragging a broken leg. There were days when the loneliness hit, especially on holidays when the kids were with her, and he'd microwave a frozen dinner while scrolling through old photos. But there were also small victories, like paying off the last card balance, or waking up without that knot of dread in my stomach. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into it with a focus I hadn't had in years, not to run from the past, but to prove I could build something new. My crew noticed. Instead of just another guy hauling rebar and pouring concrete, I started stepping up, solving problems before the foreman even showed up, routing supply lines when a delivery was late, or motivating the team during rain delays. When deadlines loomed, I stayed late, not out of desperation, but with a sense of pride, watching the structure rise from dirt to skyline. 6 months in, the superintendent pulled me aside during a lunch break. "Mark, you ever thought about moving up? We need guys like you running jobs, not just working them. You've got the eye for it." 2 months later, after interviews and a certification course I crammed for at night, I was wearing a different hard hat, white instead of yellow. Foreman, leading a team on a new retail complex downtown. It wasn't just a new title, it was validation. After years of being dismissed as unromantic or unambitious, I was now the guy leading 20 people on a project that would shape the city skyline. My paychecks doubled, the hours got a little more predictable, and for the first time in forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was climbing. But it wasn't only about work. I had to rebuild myself too, piece by piece. I started running again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. At first, I could barely make it around the block without wheezing, but week by week, the lungs opened up, the legs remembered, and the miles stretched longer. One morning, as the sun rose over the Indiana fields, sweat soaking through my shirt and the cool air filling my chest. I realized I was smiling, not the polite smile for others, a real one. The gym followed. I joined a no-frills place near the apartment, with clanging weights and motivational posters on the walls, lifting iron, feeling the burn, watching the weight on the bar creep up. It was therapy without the couch, each rep said. In not broken, in rebuilding. And the kids, God, the kids were the best part. On my weekends, I planned simple adventures, hiking trails in Brown County State Park, backyard baseball in the apartment complex's green, movie nights with popcorn everywhere. I made a rule for myself, phone away. No work emails, no distractions. They deserved all of me, not the scraps I used to give after 12-hour shifts. One night, Jake looked up at me as we grilled burgers on the tiny apartment balcony and said, "Dad, you seem happier now. Like, you laugh more." That nearly floored me. Kids see everything. I bent down, ruffled his hair, and said, "I am, buddy. I really am. Being with you guys makes everything better." Co-parenting stayed complicated. Schedules shifted, drop-offs got missed. There were whispers the kids shouldn't have to carry. I kept my cool, documented what I needed to, and focused on being steady. Losing my temper wouldn't help them. Through it all, my parents remained my rock. Dad still called me his golden husband, even though I wasn't anyone's husband anymore. "It's not about her," he said once, while we fixed his old lawnmower. "It's about the kind of man you are. You kept your vows, even when she didn't. That's worth something." By the 1-year mark, life looked different, smaller apartment, tighter budget, but I was stronger, leaner, more present. My identity wasn't chained to someone else's approval. It was tied to being a father, a leader at work, and a man who got up every day ready to fight for a future he could be proud of. Freedom has a strange taste. At first, it's bitter, lonely nights, awkward silences, second-guessing, but give it time, and it becomes sweet. Like that first sip of cold beer. They're mowing the lawn on a 90-degree day. Hard-earned, deserved. I don't know where life will take me next, whether love will come around again with someone who understands the weight I can carry, whether I'll buy another house someday, one that's truly mine. But I know this, I'm no longer trapped in a cage I built with my own 2 hands. Now, every brick I lay on the job site, every mile I run through the dawn-lit streets, every moment I spend laughing with my kids over ice cream or board games, it's not for appearances or for someone else's approval. It's for me. It's for them. It's for the freedom I finally claimed and the life I'm rebuilding, stronger than before.